So last week, I spent time on vacation, got out of here, went up to the Twin Cities area and spent time with my kids. It was great to unplug. Really kind of felt like I fully unplugged. The problem with that is you come back and then you're like, oh gosh, what's happening? What's going on? And I was aware that when I came back, I would be preaching on Mother's Day. And I don't know if you realize this, but Mother's Day feels like a pretty heavy lift as preaching day. I mean, there's kind of high expectations, it's got to be good kind of thing, right? And so I was a little worried about that as I looked at our series and as I looked at the text for today. Now, I love our series. Again, we're talking about holding on. And we oftentimes hold on to wrong things, and we don't hold on to right things. And we need to do a better job discerning what the right things are to hold on to and what wrong things to let go of. And so that whole process is aided through watching what the risen Christ did and some of the things that he said that we should do. And so here I'm sitting kind of in a group of trusted friends, several of who are mothers, and I'm thinking, doubting Thomas and Mother's Day, how does that work, right? And so I just asked a question. I'm like, did I get that wrong? Like, is this going to work? The response I got from the mothers was immediate and visceral. And I was like, woo. Now, I've never claimed to be an expert on moms or on the institution of motherhood, not only just a gender thing, but I had two moms in my life, neither of whom I did well with. And so I don't at all even kind of want to claim and hold on to any kind of understanding of motherhood. But I learned something. What I learned from that immediate and visceral response was, moms doubt all the time, don't you get that? And I was like, oh, I don't know, when my moms were lording it over me, they seemed pretty confident. So that was a new thing for me. Right, was the kind of concept of motherhood sprinkled in with doubt. So I did what I do, and that is I went and did research on it and found lots of actual academic studies that connected. The most recent was a 2023 study that was done by Fortune magazine, and they studied the habits of women and said that in the high 70s have a lot of anxiety and doubts and esteem struggles, and that only gets worse when they become mothers. Of that subset, that struggle, 63% of them say it's worse when you become a mother, the doubts that you have. And the conversation was interesting because it's not like we ever doubt love, but we doubt ourselves and whether we've done the right things or not. But in the way our society works today, there is an undercurrent, acknowledged or not, there's an undercurrent of, if I just loved better, I wouldn't have made a mistake, right? So mothers doubt, and mothers doubt themselves. And ultimately, I think it actually even boils back to mothers sometimes doubt the love that they have, if they've loved well enough or right enough. And that's just a hard thing. Now, that article from Forbes, they had 5 strategies for doubting less, and I didn't think 3 of them were very good, but 2 of them bear repeating. And one of the strategies for doubting less is something that we've talked about pretty regularly here. That is to not compare yourself as a woman to the other women and mothers around you. We've talked about that pretty thoroughly, that comparison is the thief of joy, as they say. And we can spend a lot of time comparing ourselves, and it's not easy because what happens is in today's highly social, especially social media society, we look at what's being shown in the world of other people, and then we're like, oh, we fall short. I mean, let's face it. And again, I've said it before, social media, you see other people's highlight reels, and you're living your blooper reel. And so it's been proven that social media diminishes our self-esteem. So don't compare. That's one of the things. The other that Forbes talked about was to just ask questions when you doubt. See if there's actually some empirical, factual reasons to have that doubt actually be correct. You know, so much of our doubts have to do with our own feelings, and our feelings are tricky. and they can trick us. And oftentimes when I hear folks talk about their doubts, they're like, well, I always, you always. I'm not, let's fact check that. And everyone sees that, everyone. Again, fact check that. If we spend some time actually really reflecting on the magnitude of what's wrong when we doubt, we oftentimes fact check it back and realize that that's more about how we feel than what is actually happening. And so those two things, right, not comparing and fact checking, those lead us right to the text that we had of Thomas. Because doubting Thomas, as he's been called, both of those things are present. Right? Why do we see Thomas in a diminished light? In part because we compare him to the other 10 disciples. You know, we don't know how many people were in that upper room. Let's just assume for argument's sake 10. Judas was lost and then Thomas was gone. So let's say that there were 10 there. The risen Christ shows up and has a tactile experience with them. They are able to hear him, see him, touch him, and then he goes. Thomas is like, man, I missed. I want that, right? The only thing that Thomas is asking for is everything that everybody else got. He's not asking for anything extraordinary. And we compare him to the other 10. And that's wrong for us, because all he wants is what the others had. And, you know, the last weekend my wife and I went to the church of her childhood in St. Paul, Minnesota, and the pastor wasn't preaching on that text, but this text, but referred to it. And I love what she had to say. She said, Thomas needs rebranding. He needs to be called tactically oriented Thomas, not doubting Thomas. Because he just needed to touch. And there's nothing wrong with that. The other reason why we call him doubting Thomas is because those are the words of the risen Christ. Do not doubt, but believe. And here's the hard part for us, though. Everything's contextual, and we have no idea of the context in which that was said. And how we choose to hear that is a reflection on us. And so societally, we've gone, oh, doubting Thomas. Clearly, what the risen Christ did. Clearly, the risen Christ came all the way back to just go, how dare you doubt? That's how we hear that text. And I really struggle with that, because I don't think that that's true. I mean, if you think about it, 10 were there, at least, had an experience, one didn't. The risen Christ came all the way back for the one. That's an act of compassion and care, right? I mean, I don't know where Jesus went to, if it was heaven or not. I don't know what kind of trip it was to come and just vaporize and appear right in your midst, but it couldn't have been easy. And he makes this extraordinary effort to show up for Thomas, and we hear wag, wag, wag. What we really need to hear is, I get this doubting thing. It is a thing. I don't want you to doubt. It is my hope for you. I came all this way to give you exactly what you've asked for. Doubt is a thing. Let's work through it together. I hope you don't doubt. How we choose to hear that is on us. But we need to ask those questions. And I believe the latter. So, doubting's a thing. The risen Christ tells us not to hold on to these things. Is here for us by grace to get us through these things. And that should be what we are doing. Especially on Mother's Day. Let's eradicate doubt on this Mother's Day. Let's do that. Because it's clear, I didn't know it, but it's clear that doubting is a thing. And so let's help us not. You know, I know how sometimes Mother's Day goes. We're busy and we're racing around and tournaments and all that kind of stuff. I get it. It's like, we got to do Mother's Day. If we don't, we're in trouble. And if we're in trouble with her, she does a lot for us, so we better get stuff done. Right? Or, conversely, she's better than Dad. Right? That's why we do Mother's Day. getting back to the origins of Mother's Day might help us to understand why we should do Mother's Day. Mother's Day was first celebrated in 1905, a woman named Ann Jarvis, because of her mother Anna. Her mother Anna was a social activist and taught Ann to be the same. Ann was so full of the love that her mother gave her that she worked with her pastor at the local United Methodist Church, and they had a worship service showing the love and grace of motherhood. It was a pretty easy sell. As I've said for years, and I still believe that there is no other institution that more effectively demonstrates the unconditional love of God more than a mother's love for their child. And so it was a pretty easy sell that after her mom died, she advocated for and got it passed in 1907 to have a universal day of mom. Because of God's love and grace that comes through mothers. That's simply what the day is about. This love and grace of God that comes to us through our mothers. I spent part of the week searching and studying and racking my brain trying to find a story or summary that would encapsulate that. And I couldn't think of anything better than talking about my own mother and her death. Yesterday would be my mother's 93rd birthday. And everything had been strained, and I do apologize. I think the last time I told this story was, 21 years ago from this platform. So if you've been around to hear it 21 years, my apologies. But I trust that the community has changed a bit over that course of that time. But I'll begin by saying my mother was good at a lot of things, but she was also really flawed in a lot of ways. She was great at organizing, she was dependable, she worked very hard, she could even be generous at times, but she was not very loving. She didn't have a great capacity of love. She approached love with what I call a poverty mentality, that there's only so much of it, so you better not give too much of it away. Unlike many of us who believe that love is like a candle flame that keeps multiplying and is fine, my mother didn't approach it that way. She wasn't very giving, and she generally created division and discord between people because she would always put organization and neatness and all kinds of things over her relationships with people. And after 5 children and 18 years, she had driven away her husband. And she was left with 5 of us. I was far and away the caboose, left with 5 of us to try to parent. And she wasn't very good at it. Unbeknownst to me at the time, my older siblings went and asked my father if they could switch seats on the bus, if my dad would be the one in the home with the kids and my mom would be the one not in the home. After, I guess, a negotiation that happened. And my mom wasn't a very big person nor a very courageous person, and she didn't have the courage to be able to do this transition kind of well. And I was 7 years old. And she put me to bed one night, and I woke up, and the next morning she was gone. Never said goodbye, not a word. 2 things that I know that came out of that. One is that I'm certain she doubted her love as a mother from that moment forward. Moms just don't do those kinds of things. And I'm sure she lived for the rest of her life doubting herself as a mother. The second thing is that my mother's relationship with me was not very good after that for a variety of reasons. We would ebb and flow and go up and down. There were oftentimes watershed events like not coming to my wedding. That led to me not talking to her for 5 years. And then it was 22 years ago. I remember it was at the end of May, and I was driving back by the Milford exit with a vehicle full of staff coming back from Synod Assembly, and my cell phone rang. Now, do you remember in the days when your cell phone almost never rang? because they were all new and nobody used them. Well, my cell phone rang, and it was my sister telling me that our mother, had terminal cancer. As a lifelong smoker, her lung cancer had metastasized and become bone cancer. And said that she had 6 weeks to live. And that if I wanted to get to see her cognizant, I'd have to be there in the first 3. Well, in those days, there were only 2 pastors. It was a big church, and clearing my schedule took a bit. Rose and the kids and I got there on day 9 of the 42 days that we had. And when I got there, what I found was my mother, a shell of who she had been. She was probably 75 pounds at that point in time. And she was dying. I asked for some time. I sat at the edge of the bed, asked her a couple of questions that she answered, but she said, I can't talk anymore. She was just too weak. So I spent time telling her about my life in Nebraska, all of the things that she didn't know, because she really didn't know who I was anymore. And then I finally ran out of words. And when I ran out of words, I just had this overwhelming emotion. It was just like a tidal wave hitting me. Because every kid wishes and hopes that someday it'll be normal. Someday we'll get there. And what became extremely clear to me in that moment was it never would. And that hope that I had always held out was dying. And so I began to sob. She was out of it, and I began to sob. She actually focused in on me, saw me crying, and she lifted her arms to hold me. What I remember in that moment was that her hands seemed giant because her arms had wasted away to just bones. And she opened her arms and hugged me as I wept. And she said to me, don't. And I said, don't what? And she said, don't. And I said, don't cry. And she said, promise. And I said, I promise, Ma, I won't cry. I felt singularly in that moment more healing, reconciliation, and grace than I had ever felt in any other moment of my life. 40 years of hardship wiped away with a single hug. We got her settled. We hadn't eaten. My siblings wanted to go out. We went out, got some food, came back an hour later. And my mother was like, she just was like crawling out of her skin. She was wanting to move. So they gave her some more morphine. They adjusted her. The hospice nurse was there. And for some reason, the hospice nurse had a cassette tape, back in those days, of this really stupid whale music playing. I'm like, what is that? And they said, well, music is soothing. I'm like, well, none of that music. So we shut it off, and Rose was there with me, and we sang. And we sang the song. Our kids were colicky as infants, and so I walked the floor with our children and sang to them over and over. And so we sang the song Amazing Grace to my mother as she lay dying. And we got to the 3rd verse. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When I got to that declarative verse, that phrase that's so confident, 'tis grace will lead me home. When we hit the word home, my mother breathed her last, turned ashen gray, and was gone. That's the amazing thing about grace. This unconditional love that our mothers have for us that reflects the love of Christ. One hug can wipe away and bring grace to a broken child. one declarative statement from a trusted hymn can bring a broken mother home. I will leave you with the words of the risen Christ. Do not doubt, but believe. Happy Mother's Day.